Hello and welcome to our Anti-Death Penalty Clergy Symposium. I'm really excited for you all to be here. My name is Becky Baker, and I am the Program Manager with Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center. So I'm just excited for us to all be here today and to discuss what our faith traditions say about the death penalty and justice. This program is supported by the Catholic Diocese of Cleveland and the Ohio Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and the No Death Penalty Ohio Coalition. In our agenda for our time together, we're going to start with an interfaith panel of speakers, all of who should be spotlighted on your screen right now. And they're going to discuss kind of what their tradition says about the death penalty, and then we will follow that by two other faith leaders who will speak to what faith in action can look like and their experiences with the No Death Penalty Ohio campaign. And then following that, we'll spend some time discussing what true justice can look like. So to get us started, I'm going to introduce the two moderators of our panel. Lindsay Danziger is the lead organizer of Ohio Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism in Ohio. And she is an ordained rabbi from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. And we also have Deacon Paul Kipstel. He is a deacon in the Catholic Diocese of Cleveland. He is the director of the Social Action Office of Wayne, Ashland, and Medina counties for Catholic Charities in the Cleveland Diocese, and his role is to educate and advocate on Catholic social teaching. And they're going to be facilitating our discussion. So I'm going to also introduce our panel to you. I'm very excited. And first we have Deacon Bill Lambert. He is an ordained deacon in the Roman Catholic Church since 1983 and resides in North Canton, Ohio. He has been involved in jail ministry since 1996 and has plans to expand into reentry programs. We also have the Reverend Melanie Slain. She is an associate for the mission in liturgy at the Episcopal Church of the Redeemer and the Ecumenical Relations Officer of the Episcopal Diocese of Southern Ohio. She serves on Equation's Cincinnati Festival Faith Planning Committee and a Mighty Stream leadership team. Melanie has two young sons and an amazing husband who she loves to share life with here in their new home of Cincinnati, Ohio. We also have Rabbi Karen Thomasha, who is originally from Worcester, Massachusetts. She attended college at Brandeis University, where she majored in sociology and minored in social policy in Near Eastern and Judaic studies. Rabbi Thomasha earned her rabbinic ordination at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, where she wrote a thesis entitled "A Lily and an Apple, A History of Jewish Interpretation to the Song of Songs." And she is currently an associated rabbi at Isaac M. Wise Temple in Cincinnati, Ohio. And last but not least, we have Steve Vance. He is a member of the Cincinnati Baha'i community who retired 6 years ago from a long career with the Department of Veteran Affairs in Washington, D.C. And he has been a Baha'i since 1971 and has been involved since he arrived with the very active interfaith community in Cincinnati. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our panel moderators.
Thank you, Becky. And thank you all for being here, and a warm welcome to all of you, and especially to our panelists. And so let's just get right into the discussion. Steve, we'll start with you. Can you give a brief overview of your religious tradition's general stance on the death penalty?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Baha'is believe in a cosmology where all human souls will progress after this brief material existence. Regarding the practical general need for law and order, the exemplar and interpreter of the Baha'i writings, Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah's eldest son, stated in 1906, the body politic has the right to punish the criminal. Such punishment is intended to dissuade and deter others from committing similar crimes. It is for the protection of the rights of man and does not constitute revenge. The The wronged and aggrieved party has no right to seek revenge. On the contrary, he should show forgiveness and magnanimity, for this is that which benefits the human world. Concerning capital punishment, the Baha'i writings state that certain acts of violence, such as murder by arson, could warrant execution of the guilty person. However, it is also stipulated that imprisonment for life rather than execution may optionally be given for such extreme crimes. In any case, Abdu'l-Baha indicated that because God's standard never changes, the final divine assessment of our relationship to that standard results from our sincere efforts, since God does not recognize clever lawyers or other distortions of fairness and justice. Two quotes from Abdu'l-Baha. Some people are like bloodthirsty wolves. If they see no justice, no punishment forthcoming, they will kill men merely for pleasure and diversion. As to the soul of man after death, it remains in the degree of purity to which it has evolved during life in the physical body. And after it is freed from the body, it remains plunged in the ocean of God's mercy. From the moment the soul leaves the body and arrives in the heavenly world, its evolution is spiritual, and that evolution is the approaching unto God. We believe that what our souls, after our physical vehicles wear out, retain from this life are the wealth of positive attributes of character and the knowledge and insight that we have acquired during our physical lives. Negative attributes, which are commonly part of criminal identities, such as brutality, deceit, arrogance, and the like, cannot exist in the next world, where the light of reality is much more obvious than it is at this level of awareness. So that individuals identifying with such thinking will find themselves crippled and unable to progress without help from others. Another quote, those who have died in sin and unbelief may become the object of pardon through the bounty of God, not through his justice. For bounty is giving without desert, and justice is getting what is deserved. Thus, as souls in this world can acquire development, so it is at the same after death. Through their prayers and supplications, excuse me, they can also progress. Baha'u'llah did not absolutely eliminate capital punishment for crimes like murder. He did, however, strongly support other options, which would give the guilty person time to rehabilitate themselves in preparation for the next world. So the Baha'i faith says that mankind must be concerned for the just protection of all individuals in a mature, moral, and ethical civilization, as well as for the just and fair treatment of those guilty of any crimes, including murder. Such justice considers our life does not end with our physical bodies, but that we are eternal spirits with free will to choose in all realms of our existence. Our concern, therefore, should be to enable anyone who has committed even the crime of murder to become tangibly aware of the Holy Spirit, to become a mature and law-abiding member of this human family by following the guidance provided by the prophets of God. In this way, the prison systems need to be improved. One last quote. Observe how many penal institutions are made ready to receive the sons of men, the purpose being to prevent them by punitive measures from committing terrible crimes, whereas this very torment and punishment only increases depravity, and by such means, the desired aim cannot be properly achieved. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Karen?
Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to participate in such an important conversation today. I'm proud to be a part of a interfaith religious coalition. It is now my honor to share some of the wisdom from the Jewish tradition that explains why the death penalty is reprehensible. To that end, I offer 3 brief teachings. The first is arguably the most profound. According to the Mishnah Sanhedrin, which is the oral law of the Jewish tradition, written into the literature sometime during the 1st and 2nd centuries of this era, we learn humankind was first created as one person, namely Adam, precisely to teach us that one human is equivalent to the world. And by extension, therefore, anyone who saves a life is considered as having saved an entire world. And the converse, anyone who destroys a single life is considered as having destroyed an entire world. By this reasoning, we couldn't consider having a death penalty. By this reasoning, from the Jewish perspective, I often remind legislators and state-level decision makers that by abolishing the death penalty, we save multiple worlds. Now, in the Middle Ages, the highly regarded sage Maimonides, in his commentary on the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," wrote, I quote, "It is more satisfactory to acquit 1,000 guilty people than to execute one single innocent person," end quote. Maimonides didn't live in the 21st century in America, of course, but he must have anticipated, in my opinion, the broken state that is our current criminal justice system in Ohio, where at least 1 in 5 executed persons becomes exonerated. Our system hasn't executed just one innocent person, it's executed too many to count. We're also taught, and this is in the Torah, which I know is the Bible of so many other religions, that we can't stand idly by while the blood of our neighbor is being spilled. We can't stand idly by when we know that these wrongful convictions are most often the result of systemic racism. And our tradition, like so many others, does not tolerate that in the least. Finally, my third and final teaching from my perspective comes from a body of which I am a member, proud member, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the largest body of American rabbis today in the United States. And it was founded by Cincinnati, Ohio's own historic rabbi, Isaac Mayer Wise, the namesake of my own congregation. And in 1979, my conference resolved, and I quote them, "Both in concept and in practice, Jewish tradition found capital punishment repugnant despite biblical sanctions for it. For the past 2,000 years, with the rarest of exceptions, Jewish courts have refused to punish criminals by depriving them of their lives," end quote. So with these 3 teachings, I conclude my faith's perspective on one foot, as we would say. And I just want to state again that I'm inspired by this multi-faith coalition that lives out the ideals of my tradition, that says life is equivalent to a world, that we must as a society find alternative ways to manage punishment, and that our religious conscience screams out against the death penalty. Thank you.
Erin, thank you very, very much for sharing that. Bill, some thoughts about the Roman Catholic Church's position?
Good morning, everybody. I've compiled the reflection from a number of resources, one of which I will quote a few times. It's the, excuse me, Catechism of the Catholic Church, which is a book of teachings and instructions based on history and tradition of our faith and on the Bible. Historically, the church was ambiguous about the death penalty, and it allowed the secular authorities to decide which way they wanted to go. The church's stance on this has evolved over time, sometimes allowing it, sometimes being against it. Such people like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas justified it to protect the innocent or to protect the common good. Recourse to the death penalty on the part of legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable, even though extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. And so that was the history of the church up to the modern times. Today, there is an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost, even after the commission of very serious crimes. In addition, a new understanding has begun to evolve, gaining significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed, which ensure the due protection of citizens. But at the same time, do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. Consequently, the church teaches in the light of the Gospels that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. The popes over the last few decades have spoken out more forcefully on this. Post-Vatican II, which is from 1964 on, the church has attempted to be more forceful in its opposition. Saint Pope John Paul II began to more forcefully lay the church's position on the death penalty. In 1999, he publicly called for an end to the death penalty. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states that the church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible because it's an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, and she works with determination for its abolishment worldwide. The death penalty's application is deeply flawed and can be irreversibly wrong, is prone to errors, and is biased by factors such as race, the quality of legal representation, and where the crime was committed. This is from A Culture of Life and the Death Penalty, published in 2005. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI states, society's leaders should make every effort to eliminate the death penalty and to reform the penal system in a way that ensures respect for the prisoner's human dignity. And Pope Francis, who is with us today, rendering justice does not mean seeking punishment for its own sake, but ensuring that the basic purpose of all punishment is the rehabilitation of the offender. And those are the basic premises that we that we live with, that we preach about, that we talk about in our church today. There are people on all faiths who are on one side of this argument or another, and we'll be discussing that later. But that is now the consistent stance of the church.
Thanks, Bill. Melanie, some thoughts from you?
Thank you. I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation, and I'm sure there are many more in my tradition who are way more qualified than I to represent the Episcopal Church in this discussion, but I will do my best here with you all today. The Episcopal Church's official stance is that it opposes the death penalty at both the state and federal level in every instance. The death penalty is not only morally unjustifiable, but it has also been shown to have deep flaws as a policy. So it's kind of from both a moral perspective and from a political perspective has been admonished in our tradition. The Episcopal Church has officially said that many times, over a dozen that I could find publicly since 1958. We do this through a series of resolutions, which is how we create policy within our tradition. At our state and federal gatherings called conventions or general convention, that may sound familiar to some of you who have had similar church-wide gatherings. The continued call of the Episcopal Church to abolish the death penalty brings evidence to the church that the church's commitment remains to the Christian doctrine of redemption and its intrinsic value on all life. In order to truly abolish a death penalty, both on a federal and state level, legislation becomes necessary, because while we may live according to our own Christian laws, we also, as people, live under the laws of our nation. So creating a congruency between the two has been a call of the church. The legislative action, though, we believe will only come with change of heart. And so we believe that as Christians, God's call for our mission of love, and as Episcopalians who've long opposed the notion of capital punishment, we take it as our responsibility to advocate for and educate our people in order to portray a loving Christian nature in all of our actions, and to call on our government to do the same. We, on a national level, have an organization called the Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations, and their job is to take the voice of the people to our federal government and to the states that represent policy of which that don't align with the church's stance. And the death penalty has been a continued conversation since the mid-1950s within the Episcopal Church, and these resolutions have continued to be brought up over and over and over again, both on the federal level within the church and also in the state of Ohio. The most recent one was published in 2017. I think from a broader perspective, though, as a Christian, we find a lot of the basis of this conversation in the reality that the person who we admire as our Savior and Redeemer was killed by the state legally and suffered capital punishment himself. And knowing that Jesus's death was in fair and due process according to the law, but still morally unjustified, we find our place in that conversation from Jesus. So I think I'll leave it with a presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, Reverend Edmund Browning, quote, who said that Jesus told us that the greatest gift we can ever give in this life is to lay down one's life for one's friends. And conversely, the taking of another life must be viewed as the greatest sacrilege.
Thank you for those powerful words. I was just sitting here reflecting on how each of you really drew upon ancient sources and interplayed them with contemporary sources and stories and statements from your different faith traditions, which really adds to the richness of this conversation. And I'm wondering how you've used these traditions and these stories and these texts to bring others in your faith tradition, or what advice you would have for any faith leaders from any tradition about making this issue resonate for our communities. And I'll just leave that out there for anyone who wants to respond with some tips or some stories about how you've helped this issue resonate with your community.
Yeah, I'll start off. One of the things that I've learned over the last number of years, especially as the organization, Rabbi Dansger, that you work for, the Religious Action Center, has also helped me as a clergy person bring this to our lay folk in like really meaningful ways and very deep ways. I've learned that there are a lot of misnomers, and that's often where I start, because I find that by and large, people, and I'll just speak for those I've engaged with in my own faith, people of the Jewish faith have often said, oh, well, isn't Judaism against, and then we'll put in like the latest political issue, and this is no different. And I found that that's actually really important to start with like the misconception, the misnomer, and using those simple teachings, which leads me to one other comment, which is, I think this is also something where we want to be simple and help people find language. I think that that's something I had to learn myself, is to find the simple language that gets at the issues really clearly so that people won't stop listening, and both within my faith community and outside that we're advocating to. And so those are just a couple of thoughts that I have to your question about really addressing that our tradition finds this reprehensible.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, from
Go
my oh, were you gonna go ahead, Bill?
Nope, hit it.
Sorry. I think from my perspective, some advice that I would share with other leaders in the faith traditions is a big part of our work, I think, as people of faith, is drawing people together and helping people see the humanity in one another, and to understand people's life experience that may be different from their own. So things like prison ministry, I know Bill is heavily involved in that here, drawing people close with those who are experiencing the reality of the criminal justice system firsthand, I think is so important. And like Rabbi Karen said, just opening that up in simple and plain terms to let people see the issue at hand, and continuing to educate them and build those relationships. I think as people of faith, and especially from the Christian perspective, we're asking people to always come to these issues with kindness and understand what their role in this world is as people of faith, to show love and kindness and protect life, and that reality should be shared with all people. Yeah, I think I could say a little bit more, but I'll leave it right there for now, I think.
One of the things that I have done and our church is actively pursuing is working with folks to understand our commitment to the growing civil dialogue. Keep talking about it. Stop the entrenchment and get out there and discuss, rather than wag fingers. Kind of open up our ears and our hearts to understand where we're all coming from, to persuade Catholics and others of all faiths, all folks, that we are working for an end to the death penalty and what that means, to help building a sense of a culture of life, rather than killing that person makes us better. No, that's not how it works. If you look at the church's stance on respect life and pro-life, people will always fight for, anti-abortion, but they won't fight for the end of the death penalty. And we're trying to get over that disconnect and have people understand the full scope of the gifts that God has given us. We work towards educating people at the parish, schools, universities about what's going on and bringing the topics up. So it's not just one of those arcane, hidden in the corner things, but it's part of our lifestyle as a people of faith. We encourage the people to act by continuing to advocate to local governments, urging public officials to support various measures, asking those who can make decisions to look for the good of all people, and working to reform the criminal justice system so it is more restorative than punitive in a situation like this. I know that I have preached on the economics of the death penalty. It is more expensive to have a person go through the death penalty process than it is to put somebody in jail for life, because of the courts, because of all these things that are involved. So sometimes people think of the economics of it rather than the value of life. And you try to hit on the restorative issues, and I think the church is making a great many efforts in this area to do that. And going into the prison ministry, like Melanie mentioned that I do, I am interdenominational when I'm there. Our chapel is open to whoever shows up for service, which, by the way, has been closed the last 2 years because of the pandemic. Nevertheless, it is always a matter of providing hope, trust, and respect to whoever happens to be there, no matter what their background is, no matter where they've come from or where they're going. And that hopefully engenders them a sense of value for others besides just themselves, and helps them understand that whatever broken life they may have come to or from, they have an option to look at a better life down the road. And hopefully this option encompasses everybody, not just themselves.
Just briefly, I wanted to add that since I've come to Cincinnati, my wife and I have had a wonderful time here with the Interfaith. And the beauty of the Interfaith is that all the people in that room are very strong, like the people that are here today, very strong in their faith. We all know that we don't agree about a lot of stuff, but everybody agrees about the golden rule. Everybody has a high moral and ethical standard, and everybody wants to work for what's just and fair to everyone. And I think that's what we're seeing here today.
Thank you all for sharing that. You all kind of touched on one last area that I want to dive into real quick here. And yes, just like with what seems to be every issue, the abolition of the death penalty seems to be as polarizing as just about everything else. So how can we as faith leaders address some of that? How can we tackle some of that polarization that exists within our communities?
This is a tough one. We like to be polarized. We like to go into our corners because it's simple. It's an easy thing to do in a rather complicated world. And we hunker down with those who believe the same we do. So we get into tribalism. We get into, we put our blinders on because it's convenient. We think it's secure. And that's the world we're living in now. And it seems to be exacerbated with the politics of the time. But what we try to do in our church and through the communities that I've been dealing with is get into discussion, like we mentioned before. Let's not judge. But when I go to visit a prisoner, I never ask what they've done. I never ask what put them there. And so we start with a clean slate of who we are, what we're about, and where we want to go. We encourage people to pray. Just pray about who you are, where you're going, the victims of a particular crime, those you personally love, and how they may have been touched by misfortunate situations like this. We ask people to pray about their position on the justice system and get to an understanding of their awareness of their relationship with God on these particular topics, to actually think about it rather than just react and respond. Reach out to families, get involved in the reentry program, the LEAF program. These things touch the families of those who have been impacted by their own loved ones who have committed a crime. And how do we help people who are being released from incarceration get back into a community where they can feel healthy and get back to a sense of normalcy rather than going further down into a black hole? Provide organizations that support folks so they get an understanding instead of just sitting in church and feeling good about going and showing up on a Sunday, getting involved so that you can see how lives are touched by the actions of others rather than just standing by and watching from a safe distance, and bring about change through debate and discussion. And so deal with the polarization for what it is rather than pretending it's not, and try to open up with prayer and discussion and honest discourse rather than pointing fingers and locking doors. So we as a church and as a community, I find us trying to do that.
Thanks, Bill.
Lovely. When I think of polarization in general, I think of it like maybe there's a continuum of polarization here, and then I'm always trying, as I'm sure many of us are, to like cut through it. And so one of the ways in which I think we are best to cut through it is to actually reiterate what my colleague Melanie Slain spoke about a few minutes ago, which is the personalization. I think it's really important to make it personal, to understand real lives that are affected by this, to get to know individuals, get to know families, and also to speak with those who are involved in the criminal justice system from many arenas. But one of the things that I like to teach from my tradition is that there's a fear sometimes if we make something too personal and we don't see ourselves in it, then we might actually step away from it. And in other words, I think it can be dangerous for us to say, oh, well, that doesn't affect my family. And I bet actually if we did a poll on this call, most people would be affected by it, or many. But let's say there are those of us on this call who aren't personally affected, don't know someone who's been on death row, for example, or has been subject to the possibility of being incarcerated for life toward the death penalty. I think that we could say, oh, well, that's not my issue. And that concerns me deeply as a rabbi, that anyone would say, oh, this issue isn't mine. And so I think it's really important to do the research, to invest in relationships where this really is something where we can see ourselves and that that connection or connectedness to fellow humanity. That's how I like to cut through the polarization.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rabbi Karen. For me, I hear it said that this is a very polarizing issue, but I don't think it's polarizing in the way that a lot of issues are, where there is a right and a left, and this is a Republican or Democratic issue. I think it's more like what Rabbi Karen is saying, where it's a proximity polarization. Because we can see people politically, Republican and Democrat, meeting in this issue of anti-death penalty, but usually those who are opposed are people who have had some experience with it, which is why I continue to advocate for people getting closer to the issue, approaching the issue. When I was serving a congregation in St. Louis, Missouri, I worked with a group there called Episcopal City Mission, who provides chaplains to children in the juvenile justice system. And if there was any one place to start, I would encourage people to start with the children, because there are young people already in this system who are experiencing a track that will put them in places of long-term or even life imprisonment if they don't receive the support from our community that says there are other ways toward restorative justice that can pull our young people out of this system and get them stuck in a place where, honestly, I believe that the death penalty is applied a lot of times arbitrarily and often imposed on those who, not on the ones who commit the most heinous of crimes, but those who have the least resources to defend themselves in court. And so we see it then not as a justice issue, actually, but as a systemic issue of access and privilege. So I think the polarizing thing that's happening is the disconnect between those who experience I don't even want to call it the justice system, who experience the system of imprisonment in our nation, and those who can, like Rabbi Karen said, remove themselves from it.
I just want to add that, as I mentioned, the Baha'i faith does not eliminate capital punishment, but it certainly does not advocate it. The strongest advocation, I think, which everybody agrees on, is that we want to see a prison environment. A lot of prisons are hells. I mean, to be sentenced to life in prison could be a real hell for somebody. And a lot of people want out of that, even say, I'd rather die. So I think that we're all pretty much advocating that we want to see a prison that helps people to improve.
Experiencing
All right.
technical difficulties.
I'm going to ask everyone maybe push mute on. Okay, thank you. I invited in the chat, but I'm just going to give one more invitation. It's so meaningful to me. I'm going to be marinating on what I heard here today. For a while, it's such a special experience to learn from other faith traditions. If anyone else has a question for the panel, you could either type it in the chat or raise your hand or come off mute and ask a question from the folks on the panel. Well, if we don't have any
I think Marge
further-
has a question.
Okay, I didn't see a hand. Marge, please.
I was going to say, as I mentioned in the chat, and as I think Deacon Bill mentioned, the cost factor is one thing that once people learn how ridiculously expensive this system has been and how very broken it is on top of that, it becomes evident that there are far better ways for us to be spending the money to assist people just in your faith traditions as you would wish them to be assisted and helped along by social services and victim services and others. And I think if we just even focused on that, there would be uniformity once the information is revealed. I mean, the Legislative Service Commission has acknowledged that studies around the country show it's $1 million to $3 million more for each death penalty case that is pursued. In Ohio, we've had 3,400 capital indictments and only 56 executions. The moment an indictment is filed, the double costs there of 2 trials, 2 lawyers, and mammoth more costs on top of that, be as much as 10 times as much just to pursue a trial, a death penalty case, as opposed to a life imprisonment case. And when you figure out that we've only executed 56 people, we've only, quote, succeeded in our aim, 56 out of 3,400 is 1.6% of the time. We are wasting millions and millions and millions of dollars every day that this continues. It goes up. So please think about that as where you would prefer the state to provide for your congregants and others. And I think that would be a helpful way of looking at this that is uniform and not polarizing.
Thank you for that perspective. I know I'm taking with me out of this conversation on the idea that this issue is not polarizing by politics. It's polarizing by proximity. And I think hearing all these different stories and texts from faith traditions has brought me personally more proximate to this issue spiritually. So thank you. And if there are no other questions, I'll turn it back over to Becky.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm going to move us into the second part of our agenda, which means I'm going to have to do a little bit of Zoom things, but thank you to our panel. I greatly appreciate all of you being here, and also thank you to our moderators, Lindsay and Paul. While I get us ready for our next section, I'm going to have to move some people around, so just give me one brief moment. Oh, there we go. Thanks. Thank you. So our next portion, we're going to hear from two faith leaders who have been putting faith in action. So we just heard a lot of stories about how different faith traditions talk about the death penalty, how we might be able to bring that to our communities. And today we're going to highlight two people who have been doing that. This is all through and part of the No Death Penalty Ohio Coalition, which began back in the beginning of 2021 when two identical bills were introduced into the House and the Senate. House Bill 183 and Senate Bill 103, both seeking to repeal Ohio's death penalty. And if we repealed this legislative session, we would become the 24th state to do so. And these bills have made it this far because Ohio's never been this far, greatly in part due to a lot of the work and effort of faith communities. They really lead the voice and I guess the charge, so to speak, in this work. And our next two speakers are going to highlight some of the ways to do that and how we can move these bills forward. So first, I'm going to introduce Rabbi Rick Kellner. He has served as the Rabbi of Congregation Beth Tikva in Worthington, Ohio since 2011. He is also a board member of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. Rabbi Kellner has been an active leader in RAC, Ohio, and is also involved with BREAD, Building Respect, Equity, and Dignity, an interfaith justice organization in Columbus, Ohio. And he lives in Worthington with his wife, Deborah, and two daughters, Zoe and Shira. All right, I'm going to hand the mic over to Rabbi Rick now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be a part of this conversation. So I wanted to talk about two opportunities that we have been able to engage in through the congregation in the last 5-6 months. But I came to this work through our work with RAC Ohio in partnership with Rabbi Danziger and all the congregations around the Reformed Jewish congregations around the state of Ohio. After launching our campaign earlier late last fall, we got involved in Abolition Week, and where we had some online conversations with our elected officials. After that, one of the things that the coalition did was contact me and said, we really need to focus and advocate specifically with a representative who doesn't live very far from me, although he is not my specific state representative. And I thought, well, of course, I have many congregants who must live in his district, but because of the way the districts were carved, I really had to dig in to, and I'm holding up the map, and then I'm looking at our membership database to figure out where this particular representative's boundaries lie and who are my congregants that are in his constituency. The reason we had to do that was because he's very particular about only taking meetings as long as there are members, constituents present for his meeting. So we had a mix of his constituents, and we also had a number of our folks who have worked on justice work, and I specifically invited about 5 or 6 of his constituents to this conversation. We also invited him to join us at our synagogue. He is Jewish and not necessarily a member of any of the congregations here in Central Ohio, but he's a member of the Jewish community. And we had a lengthy conversation with him. We had a member of our congregation who spoke about her own personal story. She is what I just learned this phrase about a month or so ago, a co-victim. Her brother had been murdered, and they have never found his killer. But she told her story at that meeting for the first time publicly in many years. And we had a number of different people speak about why abolishing the death penalty is important to them. I shared some aspects of our text tradition, similar to what Rabbi Thomasha shared with us earlier. It was a really a powerful conversation. I invited him in thinking that he would spend maybe 30 minutes or so with us. I think he spent close to 90. It's not clear to me that yet if we have changed his opinion on the death penalty. He would not take a stand, although he did seem a little bit hesitant to commit to our cause. But the fact that he was willing to listen to us, speak with us, and really have a very powerful dialogue with us gave us a sense that I think he was open to this particular issue. Secondly, I was approached by the coalition to engage another one of our state representatives. And this time I said, well, I wonder if it might be this time someone who does represent our district and most of our congregants. And I thought, well, how wonderful would it be if instead of me just doing this by myself, if we joined together with another local faith-based organization. So I contacted a friend of mine who is the pastor of the local Mennonite church not too far from us, who also has a number of constituents in this particular state senator's district. And we worked together to not only craft what was going to be a really meaningful evening, but where he and I each shared some perspectives of our faith tradition, but there were a number of co-victims who spoke and shared their stories of all different faith traditions. I think there were Jews, Christians, and Muslims who had each shared about their own personal stories and their connection to this issue as co-victims. We did invite our state senator to attend. We told her that she could attend kind of incognito, so we're not 100% sure if she was there. It was on Zoom, and she at that time we also asked everyone to call her office and really pitch this issue to say when the bill does come up in the state Senate that she should be supportive of abolishing the death penalty. We had learned from just speaking about her commitment to causes and issues over the years that she's really responsive to her own constituents. So these are two examples of the work that we have done, and I will only add that or highlight that it was really critical that we had the support of the coalition who helped us kind of craft this, who actually made some of the invitations to some of the speakers at the Interfaith event that we held with our state senator, and I would say that this is such important work because so much of our faith traditions talk about life and death, and to have our voices absent from this conversation really feels to me as though that there is an absence of that moral voice that we might have the potential to bring to it. And because our faith traditions do talk about life and death, we need to be present here, and we need to be talking about and bringing our values and our traditions to this particular issue and advocate to abolish the death penalty.
Thanks, Rabbi Kellner. Thanks for sharing those experiences. And especially kind of the many nuances of working with the legislators and the different avenues we have to try to get to do that. Our second speaker for this portion I'd like to introduce to you is Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker. She is the Executive Director of Greater Dayton Christian Connections, and she is also on the board of Ohioans to Stop Executions and Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. She is married to Reverend Shelby Walker and the proud mother of 5 children from a blended family and a gamma to 10 grandchildren.
Thank you, Becky. Becky asked me to answer 3 questions, and I'm going to try to do that. The first question, why are people of faith called to end the death penalty? And I'm just going to go through 2 scriptures really quickly. In Mark, the 12th chapter, the 28th through the 31st verse are the greatest commandments. One of the teachers of law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked them, of all of the commandments, which is most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is, hear this, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandments greater than these. In James, the 1st chapter, the 22nd verse, it says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do as it says. That's why people of faith are called to end the death penalty. We're to love each other as we love God. And we're not to deceive ourselves by doing anything else, but doing what the commandment says. My experience and why I oppose the death penalty is I'm, as Rabbi said, a co-victim family member. My husband and I lost our son in 2013 to gun violence. The person was never captured, but I had always opposed the death penalty. And when I was in seminary, I had to do a opposition of the death penalty, either for or against, and I did the opposition. And my professor at the time said, you're only opposing the death penalty because you haven't had anyone in your family that was murdered. And when that came true, for 2 weeks, and you'll hear this in a little bit, for 2 weeks, I did have that feeling of, I want this person dead who murdered my son, but that was for 2 weeks. And then I thought really that I didn't want anyone else to feel the pain that I had felt, meaning another mother, brother, or sister. So I was also asked to discuss my experiences. I sat on the Montgomery Valley Ohioans to Stop Executions. And years ago, at the Easter sunrise service that Greater Dayton Christian Connections put on, we gave our tithe of an offering to Otzi at that point. And that was before I was on the board or anything. We used to hold prayer vigils for those that were about to be executed. Then Reverend Dr. Jack Sullivan, who's on the call, I saw, convinced me to be on the Otzi board and to be on the Journey of Hope board. With Otzi, I've worked with them on a Right to Life campaign that's geared towards conservative voters and those who, as we heard earlier from the panel, talk about the right to life for unborn children, but do not consider the right to life for those who are being executed. I work with IJPC. I'm working on phone banking and also working on the bi-weekly Clergy Coalition. And I work with Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing. And I want to just show you a quick clip from Journey of Hope. It'll be about 3 minutes. Once I find it, because I had it right up here and then now it's gone. Let's see. Share soon. And there's my notes.
Invariably, any one of us that opposes the death penalty is met with a response at some point that you'd feel differently if it happened to someone that you love. I agree with that. I did feel differently when my wife was murdered, and I asked folks, can we talk about it?
What I really resonated with is someone was murdered as a retaliatory killing for my son's murder. And I thought about that mother and about those brothers and sisters and those grandparents and possibly children of the victim. And I didn't want anyone to have to feel the way that I felt.
I said to myself, if I forgive him, does that mean I won't be able to cry and miss my father? If I forgive him, is that saying it's okay for what he did? Am I excusing or condoning that act? And I had to really sit down and say to myself, no, Suzanne, it is wrong. It is wrong, not just for you, it's wrong for James Bernard Campbell, and your father probably forgave him before he took his last breath. I'm sure of that.
Speakers from the Journey of Hope are persons who have experienced violence and have chosen to move toward healing and reconciliation rather than revenge. Since 1993, they have been sharing that message, urging society to take the same path from violence to healing. One step in that journey is to end the use of the death penalty. The organization is led by family members of murder victims, joined by those who have a loved one who has been sentenced to death, and also by persons who have received a death sentence, but were later found to be innocent of the crime. They have spoken in schools, universities, congregations, and community groups around the world and in 40 U.S. states. Here's a sampling of the message they bring.
My younger sister, Jennifer, was murdered in our hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, in 1997. I'm in the demographic that many prosecutors and attorneys believe would be supportive of capital punishment as a remedy, if you will, for people like me who've lost loved ones to murder, as a way for us to arrive at closure and wholeness. And but along with my Journey of Hope colleagues and friends, we know that first and foremost, there is no such thing as closure for any of us. We will always experience pain and grief as we reflect on our loved ones who were murdered. And also, there's just no way the taking of another life, even if the person was actually guilty, does not help us achieve wholeness or any kind of closure, and does not satisfy our grieving.
As a young
The last question that I was asked, well, last two questions were, what are some of the things that as clergy I've done? Well, with Greater Dayton Christian Connections, we held a virtual prayer breakfast with House Representative Willis Blackshear and Reverend Alan Harris to discuss death penalty repeal. We had a webinar with Bishop Richard Cox and Father Ben Spear Hardy and Jennifer Pryor to discuss repercussions of the death penalty for African Americans. We had a Facebook campaign for our son Edward's birthday to raise funds for Journey of Hope. We helped to bring the Journey of Hope board meeting to Ohio to 2021, worked with the committee for the Good Friday Walk for Justice and Peace. The repeal of the death penalty is always the first station of the 14 stations, and various speaking engagements with Ohio, with Journey of Hope, both in person and virtual, to help repeal the death penalty. Even spoke to a group of students in France. So how can faith leaders, how can you all get involved with this? You can participate in phone banking, and that happens every Thursday, 6 p.m. And Becky can let you know how to do that. You can give financially to the campaigns, No Death Penalty Ohio, Ohioans to Stop Executions, and others. You can invite a Journey of Hope speaker or an OTSI speaker or an IJPC speaker to your congregations. You can have handouts on the death penalty at your place of worship, and I actually put a link to those handouts in the chat. You can preach, speak, or teach about the societal harms of the death penalty, or invite somebody to do it if you don't feel comfortable. You can go to different websites of IJPC, OTSI, No Death Penalty Ohio to see what a difference you can make. Call your congressional representatives. There's so much that you can do. If each one of you would take just one of those, we'd be appreciative. Thank you. Back to Becky.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Crystal Walker and Rabbi Rick Kellner. I'm so grateful for you both sharing today, and grateful for the rest of the panel. And the short amount of time that we have left, I'm going to do everybody's favorite thing